So thank you, Arno. Again, let me point you guys to the ask question section in there. If you've got any questions, again, just remember, please type them away, either anonymously if you're a little shy, or not. We will be tracking them and getting back to them. So I mean, I took from that a real sort of balance. Yeah, there's a reflection on both the good things or the bad things that are happening, Costa Rica, increased ransomware, threat on supply chains, but also the good. You know, there's an acceleration of an understanding in the industry. There's a spirit of looking to collective defence to better the position, and there are solutions and there are ways and means to address the escalating threat level. But in the knowledge that we don't want to be a Costa Rica, I'd like to welcome Lieutenant General Sir Graeme up on the stage. He not only is chairman of our Cyber Advisory Council, but also former director of UK Special Forces. And today, Sir Graeme is going to share his views on what's going on in the world from his perspective and how that impacts the world of cyber and indirectly, of course, impacts all of us today. Thank you, Sir Graeme.
I was rather hoping that Arno was going to go on for another 20 minutes and I could get away with a bye, but my luck never holds out anything like that. I like the question that was here originally on the paperwork, which said, reframe the conversation. Very British. You know, I mean, terribly British. Let's reframe the conversation, gentlemen. The answer is, I'm an old soldier. At the end of the day, you know, had a troubled life, but managed to survive. So the question is simply this, to put it into sort of language which I'd understand. Who in the room here has found themselves in a minefield? Literally. Yes? Nice one. Oh, yeah, not disappointed. Madam, the answer is, what is the first thing you do?
Well, after you stop panicking, stand still.
Stand still? Oh, please take the stage. Your name? Sorry.
Diane McLean.
Diane, fantastic. Diane nailed it. Stop. Yeah? You really have to stop. Assess the situation, decide your course of action, then do it. But stopping is the most important thing. So reframe the conversation, I think, is a really relevant. Normally you think, oh, you know, when Arno said this is our 9th summit, you go, oh, I'm losing the will to live here. At the end of the day, you know, not another summit. Actually, reframing the conversation, taking stock of where we are now, I think is really, really important. Because otherwise you just carry on pedaling. And the course you took when this problem, cyber, began to in fact appear was probably with good intention, maybe in the wrong direction. You throw in a shed load of money at the problem, you throw in a shed load of people at the problem, you're making progress. You just need to stop. Assess where you are, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and reframe where you're going to go to as it stands. Yeah? Because I sense you were, the fact you're still here means you survived. We were in a crisis. My view is you now face a problem. And your approach to that fundamentally changes. Because if you carry on seeing this as a crisis, then people just don't listen. If you keep on demanding more money when times are hard, you won't get it. And then it'll be either you get hit by a massive cyber event, or you find yourself, in effect, actually what I call just not resolving the problems you should do based upon where we are today. And so therefore, in fact, my part is to really try and set some sort of context. You know, they say that information is just information. Information in context is knowledge. Now, I'm an old guy, single, yeah, at the end of the day, you know, I don't really watch the news. I read the odd thing as it comes through as it is, yeah. So it's a very personal view. But my experience says you have to see things in multi-dimensions. You have to see it at least in 2. In fact, you need to see it in 3 dimensions, above, below, left, and right of you. In fact, ideally, you need to see context in 4 dimensions. You have to see it, what was, what is, and what will be, over time, as it stands, because the problem, adjusts accordingly. And so this idea of therefore setting the context over time is really, really important. The Chinese suggest that you should try and avoid living in interesting times. They've got it right, and you're screwed. Yeah, the answer is these interesting times are not going away. They're never going away. The reality is for the rest of your working life, the rest of whatever few years I have left, will be in one where we are sitting in persistent uncertainty. We've had 40 years of a sort of aberration in many ways. You know, tomorrow is going to be slightly better than yesterday. There was ups and downs and bumps, but truly speaking, that's how it sort of looked. All that's changed. You have the uncertainties, which are now a forever problem. And so this ability to then turn around and say, well, how do I operate in this space? What happens in this space is something you as companies now must in fact take stock of as it stands. And so therefore the idea of saying, oh, where is that the persistent uncertainty? My view is it's near term, mid-term, future term. Personal view. Take it or leave it. But the answer is just review yourself and where you are in your business in 3, 5, and 10 years' time, and you'll think, God, that old bloke was right. But it's no longer a crisis. That's the bit that's really, really important as far as this space is concerned. In the military, we have a system, in fact, which in helicopters, we have the ability called rate stops on helicopters, of which if you're facing a crisis, a serious event, and you suddenly think, I've got twice as many people on this hill, and actually things are going really badly, I need to get everybody off it now in the helicopter, but my helicopter only takes 40 people, but I've got 80 people that I need to lift, and I have one lift option, otherwise they're all dead, the remaining 40, then what you do is you cram all 80 in, make sure they strip off to their underwear, and then you pull the rate stops out on the engines. It allows you to, in fact, surge the power above and beyond limits of safety. It runs you at 110% plus and then some. And there's nothing in the book that says how long the engine or the gearbox will survive this amount of extra power that's being flooded through it. But it will get you off the hill. So you whack the rate stops out, take the power on, hopefully lift off the hill with all 80 on board, all the kit left behind. As soon as you can, you make a judgment as to putting those rate stops back in again and get yourself back into a steady state, and therefore, in fact, will continue to make the rest of the journey. My sense is that's why this is a really interesting summit, because I think we're at that point in time where we've whacked the rate stops out. You threw a beltload of money, you put a beltload of people at the problem of cyber, and rightly so, because it was a great unknown. Now's the time to take stock, judge what the time is right, whack the rate stops back in, because you now need to be, as far as cyber is concerned, in my personal view, now accepting a steady state. The crisis is gone. The problem remains and will be forever. So don't take your eye off this ball. Just don't let it consume your whole working day or the like. And why can I say that? Well, I think two things have happened. One is you've bought a beltload of hardware. You've bought in some great software. Microsoft's a good example. We're not promoting them, but actually, in fact, they know what they're doing. Oh, by the way, let them carry the load of cost in getting it right, because they can put billions into what needs to be done and you can't. So piggyback in and partner with the right sort of people. But the truth of the matter is the software and the hardware is part of that as you've come through. But the most important in me, what has happened, is there's an awareness now in all company spaces from the board to the workplace of the dangers and the consequences of not being focused on cyber as a problem. So both of those are now not resolved, but are understood. You now need to take stock of, in fact, the costs of your hardware and your software and make the most out of what you've got and where you're going with it, yeah? So it's eased, it hasn't gone away. Now, where do you now sit, or where do you find yourself sitting, or where do we sit collectively as a country, or in fact within your corporations and business? Well, my good friend Tom Fletcher wrote a really good book. He was an ambassador, he used to work with in Lebanon. Now he's in fact, I think he runs Hertford College at Oxford. Wrote a book called World in Flux. Everything is in flux. Nothing is predictable. Diplomacy, politics, money, markets, just keep ticking, social, just keep ticking the lists off, yeah? Nothing is where you could sort of say, well, that's where it's gonna be. So it's all moving in this sort of what I call, not distorted way, but quite difficult to sort of try and hold it down and sort of capture it. But the truth is, all of it's moving all of the time. The implications of that is therefore it's quite difficult to see the moving parts that are coming against you and or the context in which, in fact, what I call world events are changing. I still remain of a view that the most interesting, informative article, or that you, if you have not read, should read, and then reread, and then reread, and read again, and then every month, in fact, pull it back out again and have another reread, is the joint statement by Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin on the 4th of February, 2022. It is wonderfully incisive. You know, in my old world in the military, it's quite simple. Everything's in plain sight. You've just got to be able to stand far enough back to look at it. And in this case, in many ways, Chinese interests, Russian interests, quite clear before the invasion of Ukraine, as to, in fact, how they saw collectively as this Eastern sort of energy that is now sort of there, the world. They talk about geopolitics, they talk about world institutions, they talk about world order, they talk about democracy. Crystal clear. Both not easily aligned, but worked through and then presented. It is for you to read, reflect on, not from, oh, they've got it wrong or I disagree. That's how they see the world that they wish to build, formulate, develop, introduce. And it's somewhat different to where we are. And so the truth of the matter is that those perspectives are really important because they're part of this disruption. This part of this, what I call, not enforced, but gradual or implied change. You know, so ask yourself, why did Brazil and Argentina come up with the idea of having what I call a different currency? Saudi Arabia is talking about it. There's a series of things which sit within that, which actually, if you stand far enough back, you begin to look at and think, okay, this is an interesting insight as to where things are. Now, 24th of February last year, nearly, we're a year on, Russia invades Ukraine. If you haven't read the book by a Frenchman called Marc Bloch, called Strange Defeat, do so. He was a professor of history, fought in the Great War, the fall of France in 1940, went to the resistance and was killed, tortured, captured in 1944. And you think, what's that got to do with Ukraine? It's really interesting because the answer is, if I'm not wrong, that is precisely what his book talks about in the fall of France, Strange Defeat, precisely what Vladimir Putin intended to do in Ukraine. He didn't need to conquer Ukraine in order to, in fact, see the fall of Ukraine. He just needed Kiev, the fall of the government, and in effect, round towards Kherson, pressurizing, in fact, all the way across to Odessa, and the rest would have been history. Just like France in 1940. It didn't happen. The bad news is Putin's not losing. Now, you might think that's a bit of a strange thing for an old dude like me to say. But he's not losing right now. His problem is placed over time. Because what's happened is that, in fact, he's cash rich right now. You know, look at the oil price, Urals and or the Brent, it's all cashed up. Then he knew all this beforehand. This was something that, in fact, quite simply you could model out before and say, what will be the implications? The answer is, I'm going to get this amount of revenue out of, in fact, what I call an increase in oil and gas prices. He's lost his European market and his Western market. That will take a number of years to impact. And as somebody once said, Russia at best is a big gas station with a bad economy. And that remains a fact. So he's got a long-term problem, but his market space is really quite restricted. Oil, gas, minerals, rare earth. That's about it. Now his partner, or you might say the other part of, in fact, what I call this sort of counterbalance of change, not because they're forcing it down us, they're at war with us and all the rest of it. It's just, in fact, where they're intending to go to is China. China's an interesting one because its market space, as you know better than I, is omnipresent. It requires actually, in fact, Europe to be economically successful individually, maybe even collectively, but individually certainly, and it requires America to be successful too, because that's part of its, in fact, global market. It surprised me the other day when it went from zero tolerance to gone. In a day, I thought, at the end of the day, that was probably going to be something that would take them till 2024 to resolve on the idea of, in fact, stepping back and therefore, in fact, not losing face. All the things that we think about, but it just shows you how easy it is to be wrong, as they, in fact, retracted out of, in fact, the position they'd taken, because what was harming was the economy. Realization they needed to get the economy going because the economy was everything. I know the figures that came out the other day was 3%, in effect, on growth. They need 6.5% to hit the 2035 and the 2049 figures, which, in fact, Xi Jinping has put out. So the truth is, his economy was the thing that was mattering. And so, therefore, in fact, they literally, bang, in a way that I don't think any of us could have done, switch it. And so they're back in the game. But they need us to be, you to be successful, to be part of, in fact, that global market. But their long-term vision, their long-term ideas, their long-term views about the future is absolutely clearly articulated. And then you've got to put some Chinese characters on that for that 4th of February 2022 joint statement. It just lays out quite graphically what is needed. Now, we in the West have a series of alliances. We're, in fact, comfortable with those alliances here. The answer is, in the East, it's more about nations that are aligned. You couldn't in any way say there is a close, even though the joint statement says that in 2022 and the 4th of February, there's no indivisibility between Russia and China on their sort of foreign policy and the like. Yeah, in many ways, you might say that position strictly not true. China's relationship with Russia is one that will remain, but the truth of the matter is, actually, they will continue to support Russia, in my view, at no cost to China. China has ground to pick up. It's going to have, and it's having, and it's got figures which will be not insignificant on COVID deaths. Depends how you categorize them. Yeah, they can say at the moment there's 19 dead or whatever the case may be. We know if you actually categorize them as we did in the UK, you'd have a completely different figure as it stands at. And their population, which doesn't seem like much, but actually India's just about to sort of crank through them and go ahead, yeah, as it stands there, is something that matters in a global position where you wish to be this enormous force. They are a massive economy and they'll continue. So this track of action, this sort of approach to what I call your future the market future, globalization, all the rest, yeah, are things which if you don't take account of, then you'll miss. Russia's more the rogue. Russia's the one to watch, especially in the cyberspace as it stands, because to come back to my point, China's on a trajectory having adjusted its position on zero tolerance, moved into a position where it's going to take whatever pain there is in fact, what I call getting through that, and therefore getting back into an active and dynamic economy, are on a position and therefore a predictability of growth. But their long-term interest remains wrapped in that 4th of February paper, so read it, which tells you where they eventually want to go. If you wish to be part of that, fill your boots. Yeah? If you don't, then the answer is be cautious about what you think a long-term relationship or alliance or, in fact, arrangement would be with them as it stands. As I said, Russia's are different because he's on the wrong side of time. Right now, he's not losing. He's done a series of things which are quite interesting. Yeah, then he brought old General Armageddon in, yeah, who had a bad track record of being a bad boy in many ways, yeah, you know, sort of, you know, and immediately then hit infrastructure and people. Smack, he get rid of him. He brings in fact, what I call the Wagner Group to therefore do a sort of what I call a brutal, almost Verdun type sort of approach of just a meat grinder. And he's, using, you know, fellas out of jail and stuff like that, yeah, as it stands. But it's costly on the Ukrainians because the Ukrainians have been at war fighting for a year. It's hard. It's really hard to continue fighting well, non-stop, for 12 months, trust me. It's really hard. So the truth of the matter is that's coming against him as it stands here. Oh, and what does he do? Who's in charge now? Gerasimov. Yeah, well, you think that's, okay, just another general. Say, no, this is Gerasimov. He's not another general. He is the general. He's the guy in charge of the Russian army. And so suddenly a special operation, even though it's still referred to as a special operation, suddenly from where I'm looking at looks less like a special operation and now has the Russian army, all its history, now tied up into a little space called Donetsk and Luhansk and a bit of Crimea, yeah, in effect, in Ukraine. He can't afford to lose. So he'll push the numbers and he'll push it hard as it stands. So you have that. You have the tanks going in. Well, that's really interesting. The truth of the matter is actually the tanks are less important. Tanks are, don't trust me, the answer is tank. You know, if you're on the ground standing around, you have big respect for a tank. But a tank is just a tank. It's no different when the Russians went in to see what NLAW and Javelin does. They kill tanks. Now, these tanks are slightly better, and a bit more sort of than the rest. But what really matters, and when I talked a little while ago, I said what matters for Europe and the West is that we continue to demonstrate beyond any doubt our resolve and determination to support Ukraine into 2023. Actually, Prime Minister Sunak did exactly the right thing in committing 14 Challenger 2s. And then we see the Leopard. They were all sort of getting in line anyway, but the answer is Britain, once again, did exactly the right thing, which shows a will, a determination to continue to support Ukraine. So Putin's track record now, so he's now got a problem. The answer is you talk about what I call counteroffensives in the spring. Actually, in fact, you know, the Dnieper River is an obstacle for both sides. Doing an opposed river crossing is a mean feat. Yeah, it doesn't happen without a hell of a lot of training, a huge amount of equipment, and time. I don't believe the Ukrainians can do an opposed river crossing across the Dnieper this side of 2024. So Ukraine's going to go on, if things don't suddenly sort of what I call have a shocking act, this side of 2024. So don't expect it to change. And how that impacts. Putin is now in a collapsing circuit, and so he'll therefore, because his principal weapon of choice in engaging in this war, in setting the conditions for this war, is simply energy. And so his relationship with Iran and Iran's place in the Middle East with the Israeli government that's in place actually, in fact, is one that is worthy of, in fact, some attention. These are the sort of macro dynamics which, in fact, You might say, what have they got to do with me? Well, the answer is they got everything to do with your business, because this can upset on a black swan event, but most importantly, it just reinforces that your world in the business space will remain uncertain and unpredictable. What you are in the cyberspace is no longer in a crisis. Step back, take stock of where you are, and work out with the hardware, software, and your culture how you, in fact, can make sure that the likes, in particular, of Russia and those who take the opportunity don't do you over. Thanks.